but it would really help if we excavated the question properly, as I have just done, and point out that it is impossible to imagine a society in which some form of gender ascription does not relate to that social form. So you have to ask yourself, why is it 100, 200, 300 years ago the debate didn't have quite this ferocity or this edge?
Stories with Will Self, author, journalist, political commentator, and Baroness Nicky Morgan, former Secretary of State for Digital Culture and Media, and of course former Secretary of State for Education, which is very relevant because we're going to talk about Suella Braverman's remarks. She's taken a harder line on pupils with gender dysphoria, saying that schools have a legal right to treat transgender pupils as the gender assigned to them at birth, and she criticised schools for their unquestioning approach. Nicky Morgan, is it fair to say that schools have an unquestioning approach?
No, I don't think they do. I think most schools, and I thought what was really interesting was obviously Suella's interview, and then the lovely Robin Walker, who I think was on one of your programmes yesterday afternoon, who captured it really, really well. Schools are not unquestioning their approach. They're trying to do the right thing by their pupils, basically. And I think that Robin mentioned about love and sympathy and empathy. I think that's really important. I'm also a former equalities minister. What I took away from my time doing that was that I met young people who were struggling with their gender, who firmly believed that they'd been born in the wrong body, and who needed those around them, including their school, to treat them with sympathy and try to understand. These are complicated issues, and I have to say they're undoubtedly uncomfortable issues for politicians to discuss, because I don't think there are any easy and obvious answers. And unless people talk about it with personal experience, you're trying to judge somebody else's life.
But I mean, you will understand then, with both those former hats on, you will understand exactly the kind of the nexus, that the difficulty here with trying to acknowledge how people feel about their own bodies and what they want their future to hold. And many women, of course, who feel that they're being erased, that, you can't use the word, I'm not saying you can't, but, they think that it's becoming more and more unacceptable in some quarters to use the word women, for example, pregnant women and breastfeeding and all the rest of it. And again, I know these are small things and I don't want to overblow them, but, I think it's great to discuss this, but I'm still not quite sure how the two can coexist peacefully. They should be able to.
They should be able to. I suspect that for most of your listeners, they do, partly because people don't have to resolve them one way or the other. We live. Most people will perhaps they will be working with somebody who has transitioned or wants to, or they'll be working with somebody who ardently believes that actually the word woman or being a woman is being erased in some way. But these are not issues that most people are tackling with. Obviously, for politicians, I was thinking about why is it that it matters so much that politicians have a view? Well, of course, we're passing laws. And actually, there was a really interesting written ministerial statement made last week on gendered language in legislation, which is another really tricky area. But I go back to, I think most people will think, hopefully, about the people at the heart of this. And that was, as I say, the most powerful thing for me as a minister was talking to people about their own experiences or a member of their family's experiences, and how actually we tend to sort of comment on the difficult issues, that the one person or whatever that's making the headlines, forgetting there are lots of others who are just trying to get on quietly with their lives.
Well, absolutely. Will Self, what did you make of Suella Braverman's intervention? Some people saying, welcoming it because they said it was very clear compared to, other politicians who've kind of danced around the issue. And some people saying, well, actually, it was quite aggressive.
Well, I mean, it's a statement of fact. You can't transition legally until you're 18. So I don't think she could be criticised for simply noting what the law is. I take Nicky's point. I think the truth of the matter is, in education, people, I speak as a pedagogue myself, are flexible and look at individual cases. I mean, that's the point. And the question, the lurking questions about safe spaces, for example, in schools, which people will be concerned about here. And that's what's brought the debate to the fore, or is the hard case that may establish bad law, in the adult world as well. And the great reticence people have to enter the debate at all, especially if they don't think they've got a dog in the fight, which I saw Nikki backing out of the whole argument there by saying in a quite elegant way, I don't have a dog in the fight. But the truth of the matter is there are two issues here. One is there are a group of people in this society who have gender dysphoria. And, I was quite close to a man called Stephen Whittle, who founded Press for Change and got the law changed on transitioning under the Blair administration. And I think, lots of us would regard that as something that needed to be done. And then there's another big underlying issue that's to do with ideology, in my view, and it's complex and hard to come to terms with. And it's to do with whether or not you view gender as a function of social context at all, or whether you view gender as a sort of pick and mix affair. And both play to different sides of the liberal worldview, which is why people find it so very difficult to think about this. But it would really help if we excavated the question properly, as I have just done, and point out that it is impossible to imagine a society in which some form of gender ascription does not relate to that social form. So you have to ask yourself, why is it 100, 200, 300 years ago the debate didn't have quite this ferocity or this edge? And I also think, if I could just finish up, that there is also another suppressed premise that tends to rattle around behind people who would describe, who are in many ways, they don't like the ascription, the derogatory ascription is trans exclusionary radical feminists. And that is, I'm afraid to say that there's a good deal of misandry kicking around on that side of the argument, in my view. In other words, dare I say it, trans women are the straw men in the argument, because the argument is really about a stall in the advance of feminism. So again, it was interesting, Nikki was talking about the way that government documents are framed and things like that. The fact of the matter is, if you want to look in terms of the basic genders that people are identified with by cause of their biology, there still seems to be major structural inequalities between men and women in our society.
Okay, interesting stuff.
Let's move on to another topic now. Joe Johnson, who is, I think, the Prime Minister's brother, isn't he? Yes, I got that right. He's written a piece in the Times about immigration in universities, saying that universities need to diversify their international student bodies, but are quite wary of accepting applicants from countries that are not on a Home Office list, this low-risk list. So to protect their standing with the UK Immigration Service, basically they're making some de facto no-go areas, state of Punjab and Haryana in India. Nikki, obviously this comes across your former bailiwick as Education Secretary. This seems slightly discriminatory to people who want to come to UK universities but don't, for no fault of their own, fit onto a certain Home Office list.
Yeah, and I think that's Joe's point really, is that universities are narrowing down who is able to come, because they're so worried about falling foul of the Home Office, the visa regime, because if you have so many refusals, then at that point you sort of lose your trusted status as a sponsoring institution. So as you say, some universities or potential university students are losing out, and universities are going for sort of safer options. China in particular, I think, is mentioned, because that they know that they're going to be able to get those visas approved. It sounds like a sensible change. I mean, this goes to the heart of, so when I was an MP, I represented Loughborough University, big international university, significant Chinese population, but lots of people students from around the world. I think goes to the heart of the point about sort of an immigration debate, where actually most people, although they might be wary of immigration, have absolutely no issue with many different students from many different countries coming to study at UK universities. So, I hope Joe does know his stuff, and I suspect that as well as writing in the Times, he's also hopefully privately raising this with ministers.
Well, this is a different point really, but are UK academic institutions too reliant on that stream of income from foreign students?
Well, they're too reliant on their stream of income, for a start. The whole impact of the Brown reforms has been to make education fungible and to equate a university education completely with the cash economy. And that, in my view, is an extremely bad thing. It's impoverished our universities enormously. The old joke was that Thatcher turned the polytechnics into universities and Blair turned the universities into polytechnics. And I'm afraid, like all jokes, it has a great measure of truth to it. I wonder how many people listening to this realize now that the government has a measure that you can stick around for 2 years after you've completed your university course here to look for work. So really the immigration debate and the university debate are in lockstep with each other, and they're about the same underlying question, which is, what will the demographic profile of this country be? But just looking at it in terms of universities, this is not the idea of the university as understood by Matthew Arnold. These are degree printing shops of one sort or another. And the problem with fraud relates precisely to the way that we present our education.
How about, we'll just polish off one other story before we go. Metric versus imperial, the government apparently about to consult on a return to imperial measurements. Will, do you measure your height in feet and inches or centimetres? What about your weight?
I'm of an age. I measure my height in feet and inches. I measure my weight in pounds and ounce or stone, pounds and stone. But I don't have any strong feeling about it at all. I can do kilometres.
Nobody does. This is the thing.
Literally,
Nobody
who
does.
cares? Who cares?
Who cares?
Oh.
Yeah. Nikki, what about you? Do you have any reliance on imperial measures?
Very, very kindly put, Dominic. And I measure my height in feet inches, my weight in kilograms, because I can kid myself, I'm not quite
That's
as heavy
exactly
as
what I do
actually,
as well. Exactly.
I was going to say, I'm a runner, so actually it is interesting, the swapping between miles and kilometres.
Yeah.
I think is what the article perhaps. All I would say is, it doesn't really matter, but to a number of people it does. It is extraordinary. Perhaps older people, perhaps people who remember, but actually, it's one of those things that actually, is it going to make a difference? Perhaps not, but it is something that some people felt strongly about. So, it's something the government promised and they're determined to deliver on.
But when we asked Chris Philp and said, who's this for? He didn't seem to know. He just said the consultation will tell us who wants it. And that seems a bit weird.
I've definitely had people on doorsteps and elsewhere, mention it to me. Not that they necessarily want to. This is not their.
Come on, listen, guys. It's being linked by the Prime Minister to the Platinum Jubilee, so it's quite obvious who likes imperial weights and measures. People who are imperialists. Come on, get a life.
No, but listen, that's fine. But if he wanted it kind of, in line with the Jubilee, this consultation should have been a long time ago. They're kind of trailing behind a little bit here.
Right, but he's just brought it out as a little bit of window dressing for the Jubilee. It's quite obvious to me.
No, well, absolutely. And we're all talking about it. So there you go.
Yeah,
thank you.
wins.
Thank you. Thank you both to both of you, to Will Self, author, journalist, political commentator, and Baroness Nikki Morgan, former Secretary of State for DCMS, of course, and Education Secretary.
It is 9:32. Let's get the news and sport from Alex Morgan.